Of course, the Georgia game just completed. You wrap up spring practice after about 15 sessions. Your thoughts about what the Dogs look like on Saturday, maybe even a little bit more important, what's really stood out for you about Kirby Smart's first run at Georgia and seeing them on the field for the first time after that month of practices?
Well, you know, Kirby Smart comes out of his first spring practice at Georgia kind of like ludicrous. He's looking, smelling, feeling like $1 million. Has a day where he gets 93,000 plus Georgia fans to show up in Athens. A lot of people thought that wouldn't happen. In fact, it looks like they had over 93,000 people standing in the aisles, standing in the breezeways. A lot of excitement around the program, which after some of the acrimony surrounding Mark Richt's ouster was really something that the program frankly needed. Also got to see the new look Georgia offense, at least some bare bones aspects of it, with Jim Chaney taking the lead there. Saw some great things there. Got to see several quarterbacks throw the ball around. Saw some young guys on defense who did some things that we maybe didn't know that they could do. You know, all in all, not a lot of negative from that Saturday in Athens.
Yeah, Jeremy, I'm going to jump in right here, and we know what we saw from, you know, the freshman phenom Jacob Eason is definitely the highlights and the headlines that we saw from the spring game. And I'll kind of dive in, you know, with what he did, you know, it got a lot of people thinking, you know, is he already ready to start? You know, what's the perfect scenario for Eason to start? You know, if Kirby names him the starter for the opener versus North Carolina, what's the message that's being sent? Is it that the Dogs are ready to win now? Or is it for Eason to build towards 2017, you know, by getting a season under his belt?
Yeah, Kirby Smart has addressed this to some extent, and I think it's been pretty clear that he is not going to put Jacob Eason in there to start until he feels like Jacob Eason is the guy who's ready to take the lead with that offense. I've said, and I still maintain, that there's an excellent chance that you see one of the two returning quarterbacks, either Greyson Lambert or perhaps maybe Brice Ramsey, who we haven't seen start some games, but has shown a lot of great talent when he's been in there. You could see one of those guys against North Carolina. I think what you see is a situation that's very reminiscent of what Georgia did in 2006 under Mark Richt, with Matt Stafford coming in, where Stafford saw action from very early in the season, and you could see that you know, he clearly had the most raw talent of any of the quarterbacks Georgia had that year. But he made freshman mistakes. Kirby Smart has told us that Jacob Eason's been making some freshman mistakes in practice. We saw him do some of that on Saturday. There were some reads that were not great. There were some throws that were maybe just a little bit rushed. And again, that's you know, with no real rush, not being taken to the ground. So you know, there's work to be done there. If Jacob Eason is starting from day one against North Carolina, Georgia fans should be exceptionally excited because that will mean that he's outdueled Greyson Lambert, a guy who, for better or worse, has started and actually played some pretty good football, both for Georgia and Virginia.
Hey, Jeremy, I'd like to ask you a real quick question about Georgia. A lot of hype coming in with Kirby Smart coming over from Alabama. Kirby Smart's historically been a defensive guy. A lot of people talking about the quarterbacks there in Georgia. Georgia finished last year kind of in a lull offensively. You know, you had a running back hurt, but last season, at the end of last season, offense was kind of slow moving. Can you talk to me about the impact you think Jim Chaney is going to have taking over the offense? Is he going to have total control of the offense? Is Kirby Smart going to play a role? And what's going to change with Georgia's offense with Jim Chaney as the offensive coordinator?
Mike, first I want to congratulate you on the very political use of the word lull for the Brian Schottenheimer offense. We here in Georgia prefer soul crushing. But yeah, Kirby Smart has made very clear that it's Jim Chaney's offense. And two things that he likes about Jim Chaney's offense, and two of the things that he brought him to Athens to do. One, develop young quarterbacks. You know, Jacob Eason really seriously considered going elsewhere after Mark Richt and Brian Schottenheimer left. Jim Chaney was really the one who righted the ships with that. He's a guy who has taken quarterbacks like Tyler Bray at Tennessee and really helped those guys develop. Drew Brees, of course, probably his most famous pupil. The other thing that you're going to see that Kirby Smart has already talked about a couple of times this spring is he likes Jim Chaney's use of the tight end. And one of the things that we saw on G-Day is that even in a very bare-bones offense, not really showing very much of what they'll do eventually, and with Jeb Blazevich, who's actually the starting tight end, not catching any passes at all, Georgia still threw the tight end 15 times on the day. Now, some of that's a little bit outsized. Georgia only ran the ball a total of 26 times on the day, threw 83 passes, and frankly, that's because anyone who watched the Georgia offense in 2015 knows that it's the passing game that needs a heck of a lot of work. What you're going to see from Jim Chaney, I think, is going to be a lot of use of the tight end. You're going to see them get the ball, hopefully, to some of the running backs that Georgia has, like Sony Michel, who actually have very good hands. That's something that Jim Chaney has done a good bit of at every stop that he's been at. And I think you're also going to see a lot of power running, because that's something that Kirby Smart has talked about, that he wants to be a team that controls the line of scrimmage and controls time of possession with the offense. It's going to be smash mouth football. I think when you get right down to it, what we hope, I think Georgia fans will tell you they are yearning for, is to see some smash mouth football with a little bit of a cerebral flair to it, something other than the Hulk smash offense of Brian Schottenheimer that a lot of times in 2015 really did not get them anywhere.
Jeremy, I'll jump in on the other side of the ball, and Kirby Smart, he learned under Nick Saban for years. And, it was Jeremy Pruitt also kind of had that same background as well. What's the stamp that was probably the main focus that Smart's going to harp on first on the defensive side of the ball to make sure that this is his defense and not anything from the past?
Yeah, scheme-wise, I think it's going to be, sort of a case of meet the new defense, same as the old defense. Schematically, it's going to be very similar. Jeremy Pruitt and Kirby Smart both run sort of an adaptation of what Nick Saban does. Pruitt probably a little more multiple on the defensive front in terms of using some of those 4-4 looks and 4-2-5 looks. Kirby Smart has done at Alabama. But the big thing that Kirby Smart's going to do in terms of putting a stamp on this defense is something that he's talked about from day one. He, quite frankly, sort of challenged the Georgia roster when he got to town and said, we're not tough enough. This team is just not where we need to be in terms of playing physical defensive football. And that really shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who watched Georgia play against his Alabama defense last October. It was pretty clear from the get-go that one of those teams was just physically superior to the other, had more depth than the other, was bigger, faster, and stronger than the other. And so, in bringing in Coach Sinclair and some of the new folks in strength and conditioning, focusing on explosiveness training. They're going to be doing that. But really, a lot of this spring has just been about finding guys who are physically tough, who can play football. And that's going to be an ongoing process that I think you're going to see early in 2016.
Jeremy, we talk about it all the time, just alluding to your last statement that 2012 Georgia defense, one of the more talented units that I've seen in the SEC, and just maybe didn't have that toughness, that grit, that grind, that tenacity that you need out of a defense, especially in this conference. I've got to hit you up with two things here. First of all, the Kirby Smart stamp on this program. Have we seen it? I know you haven't played a real game yet, but any differences that you can conclude between the Mark Richt regime and what we've seen out of Smart thus far?
It's been sort of interesting to watch Kirby Smart work. One thing that was really, quite frankly, a little unnerving for some Bulldog fans is that he tells people to call him Kirby, not Coach Smart. That doesn't just go for recruits who he's trying to appear young and hip to. That goes for coaches. That goes for visiting high school coaches. That goes for parents. That goes for players. He's been called Kirby, and he just prefers for people to do that. It's a very personal kind of touch. There's been a lot of enthusiasm that you've seen, and I think that's a big part of his stamp on the program. Mark Richt could be very enthusiastic as a coach when he wanted to be, but I think coming from that Bobby Bowden school, he kind of learned to temper that sometimes, and it was something that he used selectively. Mark Richt was never really much of a rah-rah kind of guy on the sidelines, and we're getting the impression you're going to see a very different kind of look from Kirby Smart. He has made pretty clear that he's going to be himself, and Kirby's self is pretty high octane. That's going to be something important for this team. The other thing that he's made pretty clear that's been a big stamp is that no one gets to take anything for granted. Every single day, the positions are up for battle, and there's not going to be any entitlement. There's not going to be any resting on prior laurels. That's something that a lot of Georgia fans were very happy about, because there was a sense under Mark Richt that sometimes veteran guys who might not necessarily have as much talent and might not be putting in the effort that they should were nevertheless kind of getting the benefit of the doubt. And having that taken out of the equation is something that a lot of fans are very excited about.
Jeremy, I think we have you back sometime and we talk about the Mark Richt era at Georgia, because I think there's some controversy in regards to, hey, this guy was a class act, first-class coach on the field, off the field, really could relate to players, was a good guy, great character, won 75% of his games. How do you let him go? Versus the Georgia faithful clamoring for a championship and saying, hey, enough's enough, we got to get this guy out the door, we got to hit that next level. That would be a fascinating discussion, especially with Mr. Waters and Mr. Loveall with their thoughts about SEC football and the coaching situation in particular. But I got one more thing for you, Jeremy. It's in terms of recruiting. So when I think Georgia football, I think top 5, top 10 talent. We've had the discussion here that Atlanta metro area is phenomenal in regards to bringing in some of the top athletes in the country. My thing has been with the dynamic playmakers on the outside. We see a Chris Conley not produce much in college, go to the NFL Combine, and just jump out of the dome. Malcolm Mitchell was a nice player, but not really, again, a game changer. It's been interesting to see those kind of players not on the roster the last few years for the Georgia Bulldogs.
Yeah, that's been something that's been a constant sort of thorn in the side of Bulldog fans. And, of course, Keith Marshall is another great example of that, a guy who goes to the NFL Combine this year and runs the third fastest 40-yard dash time for a tailback ever at the Combine. Was essentially on a milk carton for most of his last year in Athens. Little used, despite having talent. That's going to be something that's going to be interesting to see with Kirby Smart. No one's ever said that Georgia doesn't have talent. Georgia perennially has top 5, top 10 recruiting classes. The thing is, talent-wise, the Georgia roster really, if you look at it all the way from slot 1 to slot 85, is not that Alabama roster that Kirby Smart had. No roster in college football is, quite frankly, other than perhaps LSU's. The depth of talent Alabama is going to be that's something that Georgia just doesn't have. First step for Kirby Smart is going to be to keep as much talent as he can in-state. Just got a big commitment from 2017 from Notori Johnson, a guy from Cedar Grove High School in Ellenwood, Metro Atlanta, national top 100 player, top offensive lineman in the state. Get him, keep him in-state. That's going to be step 1 for Kirby Smart, is keeping that talent in-state. But Mark Richt did a pretty decent job of that. Step 2 is going to be developing it. And he's already taken some steps to doing that. Brought in Sam Pittman as the offensive line coach from Arkansas, a guy who's perhaps the best in the business at what he does. James Coley to coach wide receivers, a guy who coached some really talented players at Miami. It's not going to just fall to Kirby Smart. That development job is going to fall to that entire staff, and really put together a pretty good staff. We're just going to have to see if they can, do a better job of that than the prior staff.
Jeremy Attaway is the Macon Dog on Twitter. Please join him there. Also on dogsports.com. Jeremy, we can let you go if you need to go, but you're welcome to stay. We'll give you first dibs on beating up on Mike a little bit since we're going to talk Tennessee football. I know you would love to do that probably between you and David.
Guys, I think I'm going to check out on you. I got to go pick Ludacris up a couple of cases of coconut water.